Just a couple of warnings. One is that I wrote down my remarks. I usually don't do that. I usually just sort of speak off the cuff, but I just kind of knew that I was going to do this about 12 hours ago, so didn't have a lot of time to to do anything else. So let me just say that, well, first of all, good afternoon. It's great to be here. I'm excited to be here, and there's absolutely no shame in my game when I tell you that I was a last-minute replacement. Being a last-minute replacement keynote speaker gives you the best of both worlds. It puts you in front of a lot of people and instantly convinces them that you have something important to say, while simultaneously dramatically lowering expectations on whether you actually do have something important to say. So I want to begin by going on the offensive, or perhaps more appropriately, being offensive, by challenging our use of the word diversity. What exactly does that mean anyway? It summons up images of corporate boardrooms that have just the right configuration of women, members of the LGBT community, African Americans, formerly known as black people, Latinos, Asians, a representative from any one of the 3 billion people or 24 nations known as such will do, Native Americans, and a sprinkling of multiracial representatives. The assumption, of course, is that they are all surrounded by and outnumbered by a lot of white, straight men. It must be this way because if somehow the script was flipped and the white, straight men were the minority, it wouldn't be diversity. It would be a Fort Greene poetry reading, or maybe a car on the Brooklyn-bound A train. Seriously though, diversity is a euphemism, a way of soft-pedaling our aspirations and our anxieties about letting a lot of non-straight, non-white, non-men in the room, or in the meeting, or in the university, on the job, etc. Race is not the only conversation that America is scared of having. We're also scared of gender and sexual orientations and all the different identities that challenge us to think of ourselves in complex and textured, and I would argue, human ways. Which brings us to the concept of public policy. There is no more efficient way of stripping away identity and humanity, I would say, from a conversation than to talk about public policy. Public policy work and its extreme form, wonkishness, suggests that all of these different things like race don't really matter. There is nothing unsexier than the term public policy. The issues, or at least the analysis of them, are somehow color and gender and sex neutral. If public discourse were an episode of Monday Night Football, public policy work would be the monotone milquetoast guy in the corner rattling off statistics. Politics, advocacy work, or community organizing would be Dennis Miller, Ellen DeGeneres, or Whoopi Goldberg, doing color commentary on the side. There are several problems with this perception or misperception. One is that this makes it difficult to oftentimes attract a broad range of people to the discipline, because this so-called dispassionate neutrality often looks a lot like straight white men. People of color, for instance, don't oftentimes see themselves as having a role to play in places like think tanks, which is where I am employed, because we think of ourselves as supplying the color commentary and not the cold, sober reality. We get to complain and agitate about things that affect us every day, from immigration to healthcare to the war in Iraq to the mortgage crisis. But many of us don't think that we should get to sit in the room where people are actually generating original ideas and helping to transform them into laws, universal practices, and structural change. Even most elected officials representing neighborhoods of color think of themselves as ambassadors, leaders, occupants of the bully pulpit. Rarely do they think of themselves, unfortunately, as lawmakers. Not only does this mean that not enough, for example, people of color or women work in think tanks or on legislative staffs, but it also means that the experiences that actually channel the passion, the pain, the frustrations, the beauties, the contradictions, and lived realities of everyday public existence are often not informing public policy. We don't just need ideologues and people with graduate degrees walking through the halls of think tanks. We need community organizers, frontline service providers, and people who are climbing through the guts of social change and have practical ideas on how to bring their aspirations to life. More of these people need to be defining what the facts are. More of these people need to be interpreting statistics and data. More of these people need to be the voices of authority in the control booth, breaking down what's happening on the field, not just riffing on it. As you may have heard, I am the Senior Fellow for Economic Justice at the Drum Major Institute for Public Policy. I do consider myself a thinker and an intellectual, as opposed to actually being intellectual. Do you know how I trained for this job? Well, let me tell you. By organizing social justice campaigns in Central Brooklyn, by co-founding a financial cooperative that provided loans and wealth-building opportunities to my neighbors, by working for a politician, by co-directing a cutting-edge economic justice advocacy organization known as the Neighborhood Economic Development Advocacy Project, by scraping by as a journalist, by buying a house, by going into debt, and by getting ripped off. Do I wish I had a graduate degree in planning or public policy or the law, and not just poetry? Hell yes. And that just may happen one day. But none of that could have provided the perspective and value I bring to the conversation about financial service delivery in this country. Economic justice is a perfect example of how we can't just allude to or euphemize about issues like race. We have to tackle them head on. For instance, the subtext of the entire conversation about the subprime mortgage crisis, the subtext that you don't hear very often, is one of race. You would hardly know it that I and my fellow economic justice and fair lending organizers and advocates have been screaming about the dangers and discriminatory features of subprime loan practices for 10 years. But only now that Wall Street is suffering is there attention given to the fact that people are losing their homes in record numbers. These are human beings. These are Americans, and let's not forget that. But they are also disproportionately Black and Latino. And the impact of these foreclosures on property values, the tax base, and community morale is being felt particularly hard in Black and Latino neighborhoods. People who have been historically redlined in the past are living a new generation of discrimination. The dominant narrative around the